Well, welcome everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Agent,
Here.
Halliburton,
Here.
Haney Keith,
Here.
Ash,
Here.
Willits,
Here.
Whittings.
Here.
All present.
All right, well, we've got one item on our agenda for this morning before the noon council meeting, and that is our budget. Eric is here with his team. I just want to say a couple of things as we kick off. I appreciate all the work that's gone into this, and I'll say more of that at the end. And just a reminder that today is a work session, work through it. If there are questions that can't be answered this morning, we'll collect them. We'll get back to you. The timing wise, this is the time to have all the presentations, work through it, and then recognize that, once we've passed this budget, it's a work in progress throughout the year and there will be changes. And one I wanted to flag is that there was discussion about staffing for planning and zoning. This is an example, but that staffing was dependent on action that you took last week with the modern zoning code. And so that won't be in this budget, but we'll address it through IBCs after the process, just based on timing. And just I say I'm looking forward to the conversation today, because this budget continues to be a reflection of the values and goals and vision that we have. And I'm really excited about the advancements that we are able to make thanks to the team in especially housing, safety, parks, open space, and doing that while giving back through the circuit breaker rebate program. And also, you've noted that we don't propose to take the full 3%. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Eric and look forward to the presentations and conversation.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, members of the council. It's my pleasure this morning to present the fiscal year 2024 proposed budget. This morning, we have several items to work through. I'll do a brief overview of our agenda. I have just a few introductory slides. We'll then spend a little bit of time going through themes and strategies included within this budget. We'll do a citywide summary. We'll go through general fund revenues and general fund expenditures. Travis Black will go through our capital fund and do an overview of the capital fund, and Sean Wilson will join and do a little discussion around cost escalation that we're seeing within our capital projects. We'll discuss fees and charges, and then move on to motions and next steps. You can see a picture on this slide of it's a screenshot from the city's website. There was a website established to capture citizen feedback. That website went live earlier in the spring, I think in April. And through that website, we've been able to collect citizen comments on the budget. A little overview as to the budget process in total. You can see on the left-hand side of this slide, the city council kind of timeline. So we began the conversation mid-April with the city council, where we did a comprehensive budget overview. Subsequent to that, right around Memorial Day, each of the department directors came and presented on their budget and their approach to the city council. And there was some really great discussion on that date. A couple of weeks ago, on June 16th, we released our budget book. And that leads us to today, our second budget workshop. Subsequent to today, we'll have the public hearing scheduled for July 11th, ultimately leading up to the approval of the budget and the approval of our L2 related to our property taxes on August 29th. From a public perspective, you can see again that the budget feedback website went live on April 10th, giving an opportunity for the public to provide commentary on the city's strategic priority areas and how the budget can have a positive impact on the community. With that feedback being shared throughout the budget process, again, ultimately leading up to the July 11th public hearing, where members of the public are invited and encouraged to come and provide their feedback on the proposed budget. The budget document itself, again, was released on June 16th. It is available on the city's website. You can see on the left-hand side the cover of that document. I'd also be remiss to not mention that there is an opportunity to interact with the budget on a daily basis. We have a budget transparency tool called Open Book, where the community can see in real time budget to actual information. So I'll now go through themes and strategies included in the fiscal year 24 budget. As per usual, the first theme that we've included here is fiscal responsibility. We have a balanced budget within the general fund per state law. So that's obviously our first and foremost consideration, to make sure that we have a balanced budget. But above and beyond that, we look to ensure that any changes that we include in the budget are sustainable over time, that we have the appropriate treatment of one-time revenues and ongoing revenues, and really build the budget in response to the current economic climate. You'll see throughout this presentation that there have been, different allowances for a potential recession. We really want to ensure that the city and that the city's budget is on strong footing throughout the fiscal year. When we do the budget, we're looking not only at a 1-year horizon, but a 5 and a 10-year horizon. So going to that second bullet, again, making sure that any changes can be supported over time to the best of our knowledge. Second theme we'd like to highlight is property tax relief. The mayor mentioned this. We'll be going into detail throughout the presentation on this. But there is a 2% base growth assumption on property tax. 2% represents approximately represents 2/3 of the maximum allowable amount. When combined with assessment data, which again I'll be going over throughout the presentation, and the effects of House Bill 292, there is a favorable condition present for residential property taxpayers, and really this is really the first time in over a decade that we've seen some sort of relief across the board for residential taxpayers. Also included in this proposed budget is the continuation of the property tax rebate program into fiscal year 2024. It was included for the first time, and because it was allowed for the first time in fiscal year 2023, there was a very successful rollout and high participation levels. So the continuation of that program is again proposed for fiscal year 24. This budget was built with an intention to be responsive to growth and continued delivery of high quality services. So we talked a little bit about this at the May workshop, but Idaho has led all states in year-over-year percentage population growth from 2020 to 2022 at 4.9%. The Treasure Valley MSA has grown by approximately 14% over the last 5 years, and many community members throughout the Treasure Valley rely upon the city of Boise for various services. Proposed investments included within this budget will help the city respond to increased service demand for city services for years to come. Fourth theme we'll highlight is really addressing pressing community needs. There are investments included in this budget to support existing affordable housing, to provide emergency sheltering for vulnerable community members, significant public safety investments, and modern zoning code implementation approved last week. Looking at growth trends in terms of positions, we also presented this slide in May, but I think it's interesting to look at. If you look at fiscal years 2017 through 2020, the most immediate years before COVID, we were averaging approximately 28 positions per year in the general fund. The 2 years preceding this year that we're talking about, we had added an average of 47 positions per year. And that was very much a catch-up situation following very minimal investments in fiscal year 2021 and in response to kind of rapid growth in the community. Fiscal year 24 includes the proposed addition of 26.7 FTE, which is really in line with the historical average. You can see the chart on the left that the fiscal year 2024 investment in new positions is just below the trailing average between fiscal year 2017 through fiscal year 2024. So again, a return to normal, and that's a theme you'll see in various places throughout the fiscal year 24 proposed budget. As we look at the various investments that are included in the proposed budget, I wanted to highlight some of the tools that enabled those investments to be possible. First, carryover funding from fiscal year 2023. This is a continuation of a strategy that we've employed the last few years, whereby we early recognize planned savings from the current fiscal year and proactively allocate those as part of the upcoming fiscal year. So there's approximately $6.6 million allocated in fiscal year 2024 from FY23 unallocated funds. There was a modified approach to funding vacancies included as part of this budget. We have continued to see very high vacancy levels, and while there may be signs of that improving, most recent data indicates we're still hovering around that 10% vacancy level. So we have proactively planned on a higher amount of vacancies in fiscal year 2024. We've looked at our service contracts in relation to our public safety services, our fire service contracts that we provide on behalf of various fire protection agencies, our police contracts for BSU, for school district, so on and so forth, in the airport. And we have employed a cost recovery strategy with those contracts to ensure that City of Boise is collecting the appropriate amount. For our maintenance and operation, overall maintenance and operation budget, which is another way of saying our non-personnel budget within the general fund, we have done some continued right sizing. In many instances, we held the line and we had no growth. And then we also had a 1.5% across the board reduction, of which half was assumed to be ongoing. That approach resulted in savings of approximately $560,000 in fiscal year 2024, $280,000 of which is considered ongoing. The budget includes the elimination of what we called an off-cycle personnel adjustment funding allocation. That allocation allowed departments through certain approval channels to make changes to compensation and to classifications of positions within, again, certain criteria. As part of this budget, we have recommended the elimination of that bucket, and we are pursuing an approach whereby we include those items in the annual budget going forward. There is a recognition of additional sales tax within this budget. That sales tax was realized in fiscal year 2022. In other words, the base was reset in fiscal year 2022, was not included in fiscal year 2023 due to timing, and is therefore programmed in fiscal year 2024 and subsequent years. Finally, as a result of the current economic climate, rising interest rates, and savings that we're seeing due to vacancies and other factors, we have relooked at our interest earnings estimates and have included a higher degree of interest earnings in fiscal year 2024. We do have tools at our disposal should we see the economy result in a recessionary environment. The first one I'll mention is the unallocated operating contingency. We have included in this budget $500,000 for that purpose. We've also allocated $500,000, recommended the allocation of $500,000 for an economic uncertainty reserve. Both of those items could be used for unexpected expenses or unanticipated revenue reductions. I'll mention that we retain our cash flow reserve, which is set at 8% of our general fund budget. And we have that available to respond to any kind of recessionary environment. Vacancies is an approach that is always available. You know, if the economy were to take a turn, we could look to hold vacancies in the future. We could look at the annual transfer into our capital fund from the general fund. And we could also pursue holdbacks on discretionary expenditures, again, if the situation called for that. Before I move on to the citywide summary, maybe I can pause for a moment if the council has any questions on overall themes and approach.
Anyway, thanks, Eric. One quick clarification on the economic uncertainty. I'm on 13. So it looks like the unallocated operating contingency fund is 500,000, but then you mentioned another one. Can you tell us what those combined numbers would be?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Councilmember Willits. The unallocated operating contingency is recommended at $500,000 in fiscal year 2024, as is the economic uncertainty. So in total, there's 1 million between those two.
Yeah, I'll take that. So we've historically had an operating contingency in the event that, you know, there's the prices rise on something that we're working on. So we've always held that. And since COVID, we've had an uncertainty reserve just because, you know, we've been up and down economically and it's hard to project where we'll be. And so it's almost like having, like when you do your annual budget, you just set it aside in case you have expenses that you don't expect related to this topic. So they're held and then accounted for through interim budget changes if they're used.
Got it. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I just want to comment that I appreciate the clarity of having personnel decisions made at budget time rather than throughout the year. I know that that's something that we've worked on throughout the last several years, is getting that kind of baked in at the beginning of the year rather than dealing with it in one-offs, which I think creates a little bit of muddiness and less clarity. So thank you.
Moving on to a citywide summary. The fiscal year 2024 proposed budget totals $747.1 million net of the contingent appropriation. The contingent appropriation is available to support rebudgets, unanticipated grants, things of that nature. And typically we will utilize that contingent appropriation at the tail end of the calendar year when rebudgets and carryover encumbrances are approved by the City Council. So looking at that, focusing on that $747.1 million, you can see almost half of it is allocated towards our enterprise funds, 40% towards general fund, and smaller amounts towards the capital fund and our other funds. A brief overview of what is entailed or what is included within each of those categories. The general fund at $300.9 million covers operating costs associated with general government services. Think things like police, fire, parks, and library. The primary funding source for the general fund is taxes, property tax, sales tax. We also have included in there things like interest earnings or departmental revenue and liquor tax. Our capital funds at $27.1 million are largely to support infrastructure projects major equipment and major repairs and maintenance, again, for general governmental functions, police, fire, parks, library, so on and so forth. The primary funding source for that category are taxes. We do an annual transfer from our general fund to the capital fund, as well as development impact fees. Enterprise funds in fiscal year 2024 total just under $370 million. Within our enterprise funds, we account for operating and capital costs for our airport, geothermal, solid waste, and water renewal funds. These enterprise funds are primarily supported by service users. And then our other funds at $52 million includes a variety of different things, including our debt service fund, our risk and workers' comp, health, housing, and fleet. When you look at how that $747.1 million is allocated, you can see three slices of the pie that are pretty close in proximity to one another. Personnel represents about 35% of our overall budget. That would cover salary and benefit costs associated with permanent and temporary city positions. Our maintenance and operation, or non-personnel, is set at $283 million. That covers things like supplies, utilities, insurance, contracts for services, transfers, as well as our contingencies. And then our capital and equipment covers infrastructure projects, things like fire stations, park improvements, vehicle replacements, airport improvements, water renewal facilities, and the like. I'll now move on to our general fund revenues. The fiscal year 2024 revenue included within this budget is 1.7% less than what was included in fiscal year 2023. That decline is attributable to lower carryover from the prior year and higher levels of one-time funding in fiscal year 2023, primarily attributable to the American Rescue Plan funds. Looking at the overall general fund revenue, approximately 60% of general fund revenues are derived from property taxes. That 60% is just a couple of tick marks higher than the fiscal year 2023 amount. Fiscal year 2023 property tax made up about 57% of general fund revenues. The primary difference here is not an increase in property tax, but more so a decrease in some of the other categories. Again, fiscal year 2023 included a higher degree of carryover funding from fiscal year 2022, as well as significant allocations for the American Rescue Plan Act. You can see after the property tax at 60%, departmental revenue is our next largest category at 12% of overall revenues, sales tax at 9%, and development fees at 5%. There is a comprehensive overview of each revenue category included in the budget document, where we go through themes, approaches, and trends in the development of each of the revenue estimates included on this slide. So moving into property tax, the fiscal year 2024 budget estimate is $180.8 million. The growth in property tax for fiscal year 2024 is attributable to two things this year, and that's the case every year. It's attributable to any base increase that the city council might approve, as well as new construction, which results in new payers. So included in the fiscal year 2024 proposed budget is a 2% base increase, again, less than the 3% maximum, and the equivalent of 1.1% growth for that new construction. Overall, overall average growth of 1.86% since the beginning of the pandemic when we look at the base growth. That correlates to 7.5 million in total property tax relief, which is ongoing. I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation that the budget includes funding for the property tax rebate. Again, this is the second year. This would represent a total of $2.4 million over the 2-year term of this program. There is no use of foregone property taxes included within this budget. The growth is well below the 8% cap that was established by the state in calendar year 2021. The average homeowner is expected to see property tax reductions on their bills that will go out in November of 2023. So we do expect a favorable condition for residential property taxpayers. There are numerous things that caused those reductions to be forecasted. First is assessment trends. We are seeing residential property values decreasing while commercial properties are increasing, which is not a trend that we have seen in recent history. The city budgeting approach, again, of taking less than the maximum growth is a positive factor, as are the unquantified impacts from House Bill 292.
Madam Mayor, just a quick question, Eric. I don't know if you know the answer to this, but do you know how much the average property tax relief people got through our rebate program was?
Councilmember Halliburton, I don't have that number right at the tip of my tongue, but I will get it for you before I'm finished with this presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Not super important, but just wanted to know.
Sure. Okay. Looking at the levy rate and the taxable value history, those two things are highly correlated. The levy rate tends to go down when property values are increasing and go up when property values are decreasing. So you can see on this slide, the levy rate, which is represented on blue on the blue line, has been going down in recent years, while the taxable value has been going up. At the far right-hand side of this slide, you can see that for the first time, really over the last 10 years, we are seeing declines in taxable value with a slight increase in the levy rate. I'll go over in just a moment what that means for the average priced home. But before I do that, let me just look at, this is analysis we've shown in prior years, which shows the average residential property within city limits. And you can see that in fiscal year 2016, the blue line on that graph, you can see that in 2016, approximately 58% of the average priced home in the city of Boise was subject to property taxation. If you follow that line to the right, you can see that in fiscal year 2024, we expect 74% of the average price home to be subject to property tax. So increasingly high percentage or increasing percentages of homes are subject to property taxes. The reason for that is the homeowner's exemption has not kept up with the growth in average priced homes. You can see that the assessed value growth for the average home since 2016 has increased by over 125% at 127.2%, whereas the growth in the homeowner's exemption since 2016 is 39.5%. Again, this is, this overall trend is attributable to the diminishing value of the homeowner's exemption over time, as well as the trend line that we've seen of higher assessed increases for residential versus commercial, with this being the first year in recent history that trend has been reversed. So we'll look a little bit at the average homeowner impact. This is a a chart that the council is very familiar with that we show each year. You can see on the left-hand portion of this slide, we'll go through the assessed value of each home and what the impacts would be if 3%, 0%, and ultimately the 2% that is recommended within this budget. So lines 1 through 8 represent what the average home would see if the city were to have elected to take a 3% increase. See on line 2, you can see the assessed value for that average priced home in fiscal year 2023, or it should be tax year 2023, fiscal year 24, is seeing a decrease of 13.8%. When you see the homeowner's exemption being fixed at $125,000, on line 4, the taxable value of that average priced home is 17.7% less than fiscal year 2023. The overall city taxes on line 6, if the city were to have elected a 3% increase, would go down by 7.8% at approximately $125 reduction. Lines 8 through 14 represent the change on that average priced home if the city were to have elected a 0%. And you can see that if the city were to have elected a 0% on line 14, the reduction in taxes would be $166. So really lines 16 through 24 represent what's included within this budget. On line 22, you can see that the 2% increase recommended within this budget is expected to result in a decrease of approximately $138 for the average priced home, saving approximately $14 as compared to if the city were to take the full increase, with the 2% increase costing the average homeowner approximately $28 on an annualized basis. So again, favorable conditions for property taxes on the average homeowner, the decreases in assessed value for residential properties, paired with what we're seeing are increased values for commercial properties. We're seeing the burden shift be, the impacts of burden shift be lessened a little bit. The subsequent slides will still show that burden shift is a very real issue, but we are seeing some improvement there. For the third time in the past 4 years, the city is not taking the full allowable increase, 2% versus the 3% allowed. And then there is relief attributable to 292, House Bill 292, which is on this slide unquantified. Even before considering House Bill 292, property taxes on the average home are expected to decline. Based on testimony at the state legislature when House Bill 292 was being debated, we could see the average home could see reductions as much as 20%, at least within fiscal year 2024, resulting in, for at least for the average price home, approximately $300 of savings. So again, just to summarize this slide, even if the city were to have taken the max increase, you would have seen a reduction of $124 on the average price home. By taking 2% versus the 3% allowable, taxes on the average home are expected to go down by approximately $140. This slide right here shows burden shift over time, or the burden of property taxes over time. And again, looking back and historically, we had seen the residential sector of the community taking on increasing amounts of the overall share of property taxes. If you look at fiscal year 2000, residential and commercial basically split the burden 50-50. In the years since the Great Recession, approximately 2010, 2011, we've seen commercial paying less and less of the overall burden of property taxes, with residential taking on more and more. Last year at this time, we were looking at approximately 74% for commercial versus 26% for residential. This year, with the trends that we're seeing in assessments, we are looking at 67% for residential versus approximately 33% for commercial. Looking at kind of that burden shift over time, this slide was also introduced last year as part of the workshop. Let me walk through what the story this slide is telling us. So on the bar chart, you can see gray. The gray bars represent basically a baseline. That would be what the average homeowner was paying in property taxes in fiscal year 2013, $661 for city taxes. The green and the peach represent, so the green represents what the property taxes would be, the incremental increase would be on that average home subsequent to fiscal year 2013, if they tracked with the 0 to 3% that the city can take as part of the annual budget process. So you can see in fiscal year 2024, the city took a 3% increase that year, which would have correlated to a $20 increase. However, there was a $94 increase on that average priced home, $20, which could be attributed to the 3% increase, and $74, which would be attributable to burden shift, the residential sector picking up more versus the commercial sector. That's additive over time. And you can see that as you go from left to right on this slide, the green grows by somewhere between 0 and 3% each year, and the peach portion grows much more rapidly. Encouraging that in fiscal year 2024, the peach portion is less than it was in fiscal year 2023. However, it is still, a very high number in terms of the amount of the property tax burden that has been taken on by the residential community. And we'll have to see if this is a trend that continues over time. If residential continues to be assessed at a lower increase than commercial, it very well may be something that we see. That has not been historically the trend. We have seen various blips, if you go back 20 years, where you might see commercial increase at a higher rate than residential on a one-off basis. And usually the following year, that trend reverses. So remains to be seen if that trend line will continue. But you can see here that since fiscal year 2013, the taxes on the average home have increased by 120% or $795. 73% of that is due to burden shift. That burden shift, again, due to the diminishing value of the homeowner's exemption and then the rate of increase for residential versus commercial properties. If taxes on the average home tracked with the annual budget increase of anywhere between 0 and 3%, again, 2% for this upcoming fiscal year, the average home would have seen a lower cumulative increase of $214 or 32% over that time period. And absent the burden shift, that red line on this chart, it represents where CPI was over that period. And you can see that had property taxes increased with CPI, we'd be right at that green line. Basically, what this tells us is that the gray and the green on the furthermost right bar are below CPI. So over time, city property taxes have tracked just below CPI since fiscal year 2013.
Madam Mayor, Eric, I have a quick question about this slide and the previous slide. So if you can go back one, the change in assessments caused basically the gap, the burden shift gap to close a little bit. But it really, the amount of tax being paid by homeowners has only gone back to about the 2019 level when the burdens were still really out of whack, right? And then on the next slide, we see in the peach section that the numbers, it's 581 versus 417. So the amount attributable to burden shift paid is still significantly higher, even though the assessment percentage is close to the same. And my question, is that because of the homeowner's exemption? Like you'd think, let me ask it in a better way. So can you go back one slide? You would think, looking at the yellow line here, that the peach bars in the next slide for 2020, 2019 and 2020 would be the same this year as they were in 2020, 2019, 2020, but they're not. It's like $100 different. Is that because the homeowner's exemption? Is that why those numbers don't line up?
Yeah, Councilmember Bajent, thank you for that question. I think there's numerous factors for that. The homeowner's exemption certainly being one. If you go back a couple of years, there has been modest increases in our property taxes subsequent to there. So last year there was a 2.45%, this year the 2%. So that will also have an effect, as well as growth that we're seeing within each of those sectors. So if we've added more commercial or more residential in any given year, that could throw things off as well.
Okay. The takeaway point, though, I suppose, is burden shift is still real. We have one small tick in the right direction this year. It's pulled us back to 2019 levels, maybe when the burden shift was still bad, and we shouldn't probably plan on this problem solving itself.
Councilmember Bajent, I think we will have to wait and see and see if the trend continues. We historically haven't seen that continue over a protracted period. It is good news this year, and again, we'll just have to track it and watch it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. This is a slide that we showed last year that illustrates, and I have two more slides on burden shift. So this one here shows the property tax burden shift within the city of Boise for the average home. And the average home is represented on this chart in green. And you can see, and this is cumulative, over time, the property taxes for city taxes on that average priced home increasing. The blue represents the average growth in city Boise property tax collections since fiscal year 2012. Whereas the yellow and red represent two big box retailers within city limits. All things being equal, one might expect to see property taxes for any taxpayer to track equally to that blue line, or to that blue section in the chart. However, that's not what we see. We see, due to homeowners exemption being fixed, due to different various other factors.
Just to be clear, in that sense, you mean fixed is static, not that the legislature has fixed the homeowners exemption.
Madam Mayor, thank you for that correction.
Okay.
Yes, being steady at the 125,000 and unchanging based on valuation shifts. You see different properties paying different amounts and kind of wild valuation shifts. So within this slide, you can see that the red and the yellow representing those two big box retailers, up until last year, they were actually paying less in fiscal year 2022 as compared to what they paid in fiscal year 2013. With the valuation changes, the most recent valuation data that we've seen from the assessor, those two big box retailers are going to be slightly different. One paying just a little bit more than they did back in 2013. One still slightly less than they were in fiscal year 2013. You can see the green. Again, this is kind of a similar type view as the prior slide, where there is an improvement, still high, but we are seeing an improvement in residential property tax and as it comes to burden. We did an analysis. This is admittedly not a scientific analysis, but we wanted to test whether this slide, where we looked at two properties, held true across the city. So the budget office did an analysis where we looked at 100 properties. We looked at 100 residential properties, and we looked at 100 commercial properties. And we wanted to find properties that had been around since fiscal year or since tax year 2000. So we weren't looking at newer homes, weren't looking at newer businesses, but we wanted to find, properties that we could basically correlate to that other, the other line chart that I had shown. And we wanted to see if that story was consistent. And we also wanted to see if it was consistent across the city. So again, admittedly, this is not a scientific study. This is not every property within city limits, but we looked within each comprehensive plan planning area, and we found that this story is consistent. If you look, for instance, on the central bench, you can see that residential property residential property taxes are 1.3 times higher than commercial property taxes. If you look at, or have increased 1.3 times the rate that commercial properties have increased. You can see that across the entire city. Over time, we might look to expand this analysis, but again, we wanted to test whether this story that we're seeing on the big box retailers held true, and it did. I'll move to the property tax rebate program. Councilmember Halliburton, I do have an answer to that question you had asked before I go into detail. The average benefit that was realized as a result of this year's program is approximately $650 for those eligible for that program. So again, this budget recommends the continuation of the property tax rebate program. That program was first made allowable last fiscal year due to House Bill 550, allowing cities to provide a property tax rebate. In fiscal year 2023, the city of Boise was the only city in the state to offer this program. It was a very successful rollout. Therefore, $1.2 million is allocated again for this program. The Boise residents approved for the circuit breaker program are eligible to participate within this rebate program. The parameters of the rebate program must be outlined in an ordinance. Council approved an ordinance last fall for this. Our goal is to update that ordinance again in the fall for next fiscal year's program. Looking at foregone property taxes, whenever a city within the state of Idaho elects to take something less than the max base growth, something less than 3%, cities have the option to declare the difference between what was taken and what was untaken as foregone, basically preserving the right to, in subsequent fiscal years, collect that amount. As part of this budget, there is no use of foregone planned, nor is there any use of foregone programmed within our financial forecast. The city council does have the option to declare the $1.8 million that is not being recommended as part of the fiscal year 2024 budget as foregone. Our current foregone balance is $5.7 million. It would be $7.5 million upon approval of that $1.8 million. In prior fiscal years, when the city council has approved any untaken property tax amount to be added to the foregone balance, as part of the resolution, it has included language that any foregone amount would not be taken in a recessionary period. Again, there's no plans to utilize that foregone balance. However, any future use would be subject to restrictions placed on foregone use that were placed by the state legislature in 2020-21. And declaring that amount as foregone would be subject to a public hearing, which would be scheduled for July 11th. Before I move on to anything else, I think I'll pause for any questions on property tax.
Madam Mayor. Eric, could you speak to the restrictions placed on foregone in 2021? And then also, is there a time limit on when foregone could be taken?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Nash, thank you for that question. Yes, per 2021 legislation, there's a max amount that can be taken in any fiscal year, which is 1%. So the city's foregone balance includes several years of decisions of not taking up to 3%. So in the first year after COVID, the city took 0%. So there was 3% built into that foregone balance. Last year, we took 2.45 versus the 3. So there was 3.55% in that balance. And then an additional percent would be added. So in total, there would be 4.55, the equivalent of 4.55%. That 2021 legislation precludes cities from taking anything above and beyond 1% in any given fiscal year, so as to avoid shock to any taxpayers. I'm not sure if that answered the question. Okay. So moving on from property tax, I'll focus on sales tax for just a moment. The fiscal year 2024 proposed budget for sales tax is recommended at $26.6 million. That represents a 1% annual growth rate, as well as the previously unbudgeted growth from fiscal year 2022. We have seen statewide sales collections begin to moderate a little bit, albeit still remaining in positive territory. One thing I'll mention on sales tax is that our fiscal year 2024 proposed estimate reflects the impacts of House Bill 292. House Bill 292 redirected online sales tax that was previously forecasted to be returned to municipalities to support a portion of the property tax growth. So that sales tax growth is no longer included within the city's sales tax estimates or within our forecast, again, as it's being used to support a portion of House Bill 292. Development fees is one of our more economically sensitive categories. In fiscal year 2024, the recommended budget estimate is $14.9 million for base activities. That would be effectively flat from the fiscal year 2023 budget. There is an additional $1.1 million included in part of our development fees estimate that is attributable to Micron-related projects. Outer year growth within development fees is highly correlated to Micron development. And I will mention within this category, there are expenditure offsets. This category is not available for general citywide use. It's available to support the costs provided by our public works, planning and development services, and fire departments for various plan review and inspection services. Department revenues is one of the larger categories within our overall general fund revenue estimate. You can see that over half of our departmental revenues are associated with public safety contracts. So services that our police department and our fire department provide on behalf of other jurisdictions via reimbursement agreements represent 53% of that revenue estimate. The overwhelming majority of the other 47% is attributable to Parks and Recreation Services. You can see zoo, Idaho Ice World, golf, cemetery, aquatics, and others. And again, as with development services, there is an expenditure offset for these. Any departmental revenues really cover a portion of our expenses that we see, and any revenues are not available for citywide use. The fiscal year 2023 budget overall for department revenues was 36.9 million, $4.4 million year-over-year increase. That $4.4 million was attributable to primarily two things. One, the public safety service contracts now reflecting indirect costs, as well as various parks and recreation items to reflect higher activity levels and fee increases to keep up with costs. I have a few slides later on within the presentation to talk about our various fees. We do have a comprehensive fee schedule included in the budget document. Increases generally are to support higher costs and activity levels. I'll mention anytime I talk about parks and recreation fees that we do have scholarships available for our youth to ensure that cost is not an impediment to participation within our youth programming. Before I move on to general fund expenses, maybe I can pause if the council might have any questions. Okay, moving on to general fund expenses. You can see that just over 2/3 of overall general fund expenditures are dedicated towards personnel, so our people. Our next category is M&O and major equipment at 19%. Very small portions representing contingency, VRT at 4%, and transfers at 6%. That VRT at 4% is of the overall general fund budget. The fiscal year 2024 budget does maintain the strategy of allocating 5% of our property tax budgets towards VRT. When we look at how that 70% or our personnel allocation is divided amongst various categories, just under 60% of that is dedicated towards salaries. Retirement and post-employment costs representing 15%, health at 18%, and various other categories, including overtime, one-time compensation, and temp and rec wages, just under 10% in total. The fiscal year 2024 budget does recommend some compensation adjustments for our general employees. The goals of those adjustments were to really retain the talented team, to preserve market alignment, and to maintain employees' buying power within these challenging economic times. So the approach for those general employees includes a 3.5% base increase, a 3% merit increase, which would be one time of it, which would be available, the continuation of low and no cost health insurance programs, enhanced leave benefits for parental leave and vacation accrual, and new benefits, including adoption benefits, as well as bilingual pay for eligible city employees. That strategy outlined on the right-hand side of this slide, again, is only for our general employees. For our police and fire employees whose compensation is set by contract, those terms are not applicable. Their compensation is again set by contract, which was very recently approved by the City Council.
Madam Mayor, Eric, can you remember right off the top of your head what those percentages were in the contracts for this upcoming fiscal year?
Madam Mayor, Council Member Woodings, I can. For the fire department, I believe it was 9% in fiscal year 2023 with 7% in fiscal year 2024. And for police, actually, I will have to get back to you on the police number, but I will get that number. 7% in fiscal year 2023, but I don't have the number right off the top of my head for 24.
So we did have quite a significant difference in our contract employees versus our general employees. I just wanted to make sure that that was out there. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. As we look at our maintenance and operation expenditures across the organization within the general fund, you can see there's various categories how that's allocated. The largest slice of that pie being professional and service contracts at just under 30%, supplies and equipment 17%, and software maintenance at 13% as the three largest categories. Our maintenance and operation also includes things like insurance, fuel, rents and leases, and our contribution towards Idaho Humane Society. As we look at, excuse me, as we look at general fund expenditures by department, just over 50% of our overall general fund is dedicated towards public safety, police and fire, and police accountability. The next largest slices of the pie include parks, library, and arts and history at 16, just under 16%. Some of our service departments, DFA, HR, IT, and legal at 16.6%. I will mention when I look at those departments, there are internal functions that reside within those departments. There are also numerous external functions that are included within those internal service departments. You can see public works at just under 3.5%, and planning and development services at 6%. As we look at, excuse me, as we look at position additions included as part of the FY24 budget, the chart or the table on the left-hand slide is included within the budget document. There are 26.7 FTE within the general fund recommended as part of this budget. There is an additional 27 FTE within our various enterprise funds included as part of this budget. That 26.7 FTE within the general fund is demonstrated within the pie chart on the right-hand side. 12 of those 26.7 FTE are dedicated towards our public safety departments. 5.5 of those FTE are cost neutral for things like parks and recreation services and parking compliance. 2 FTE associated with the modern zoning code, 13% or 3.5 FTE for our support departments, the 1.5 FTE to support the city council, and then 2.25 FTE for various other purposes. You can see on this slide, really the primary focus of positions included as part of this proposed package were externally facing.
And I just want to flag on that on the public safety. It's 9 police in the police department, correct? And then 3 in fire.
Madam Mayor, that is correct. 9 FTE in the police department, 3 in fire.
All right. And I'll just remind council that 3 in fire is to add 4-person staffing at the first station that was recommended by leadership. And then we intend every year to move from there.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And just one follow-up question, Councilmember Whittings, regarding police and fire compensation. It was 9% for fire and 9 and 7 for fire and 7 and 6 for police. Thank you. We now have Travis Black, who's going to do an overview of our capital program.
Thank you, Eric. The recommended capital fund budget for 2024 is $27 million, over half of which is for major equipment and major repairs and maintenance. The major repairs and maintenance budget primarily reflects deferred maintenance at the downtown library, as well as investments in parks and recreation. On the MEQ front, the majority is for public safety vehicles, both police and fire. There's also $1 million for IT equipment needs and also for park and rec, so another $1 million for that. On the capital project front, over 2/3 of the recommended $12.2 million of overall capital project funding would be for the city facility at Warm Springs, which had the first $1 million approved as part of an IBC, I think 2 months ago. So this would be the actual construction budget for that project. In addition to that, that city facility, there's numerous planning dollars set aside in the recommended 2024 budget, including planning for police technology improvements, future pathways, enhancements to 8th Street, as well as, back to Eric's point on the 4-person staffing, design studies for station remodels to accommodate that 4-person staffing. I wanted to include this slide just to give you a little bit of historical context, because, you know, in the budget book, I talk about basically a 2/3 reduction in the capital budget this year. But I wanted to include this for context to show that it's really just a return to normal. And that last year was, although they were all planned projects, it was just unique that they all hit in the same year. So we had an abnormal number of fire engines. We had, 23 million for 2 fire stations, 19 million for the support facilities. And it was just, and 13.5 million of a transfer to the housing fund that represented future programmed amounts for affordable housing that we had set aside in the capital fund, but we accelerated all that into that transfer last year. So again, hence, as you can see, the very high level of funding last year and this year is, as was kind of the theme, and excuse me, in the general fund section, kind of return to normal. Turning to the revenue side, the transfer from the general fund represents about 2/3 of the fiscal 2024 proposed revenue budget. This $14.2 million transfer consists of the $13 million base transfer plus a one-time transfer of $1.2 million. To provide some context on general fund transfers, historically, it's been around $13 million. That was reduced last year due to police tasers, as well as major repairs and maintenance investment for the housing stock for our housing team. And so because of that, it reduced the ongoing base transfer to 12.5. This year in the recommended budget, it's recommended to bring that back to 13 million, both for fiscal 24 and 25, and then increase it to 13.5 million thereafter. In addition to the general fund transfers, there's roughly 3.5 million for electric franchise fees, which is in line with historic revenues in that category. There's also a $2 million donation that we'll talk about more later. 1 million of interest income, and as Eric noted in the general fund section, that's increased due to the interest rate environment, as well as increased fund balance. And then finally, there's 350 grand from CDBG funding for the restroom in CW Moore Park. In preparing the 24 budget, leadership asked that we create a reserve in the capital fund to begin setting aside money for future facility needs for both public safety and library needs. So the creation of this $5.5 million reserve results in effectively no kind of free or otherwise unprogrammed fund balance at the end of 2028. But I would also note that we anticipate that one-time savings that we recognize or that we find going forward could be used to supplement the facility reserve. And kind of the purpose of setting up the facility reserve, rather than just having $5.5 million sitting in unrestricted fund balance, is to kind of force future trade-off discussions, as opposed to just taking money from fund balance. Now we're taking money from this facility reserve. So it forces a better conversation on, what are we getting and what are we giving up for, new projects or cost overruns on existing projects that Sean Wilson will actually talk about in a little bit in terms of the cost escalation. One item to note on this slide is just that the balances presented there reflect advances that the capital fund is making to cover impact fee funded projects when impact fee fund balance is insufficient. So for example, the 2023 ending balance would be about $7 million higher if not for advanced funding for Fire Station 13. But that also gives a lever that we have in future years. So if we were running lower on fund balance than we had projected, we would not advance money for, let's say, a new park, for example, if we needed it to cover other items in the capital fund.
Madam Mayor, I have a quick question. Thank you. This is really helpful. I want to seek some greater clarity. So this is separate from all of the projects that are currently in the pipeline. This is a separate fund just available for new things or potential cost overlays.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willetts, what the reserve is for specifically are the two facility categories for police and fire, or I'm sorry, for police, possibly fire, and then library. And right now, one of the things I'll get to in a couple of slides is one of the themes for the 2024 budget, in addition to being a return to normal, is there's a lot of planning dollars. And so planning for, potential fire station remodels, there's also planning not set aside in the capital fund, but planning for police staffing needs. And that relates to police facility needs. And then there is back in the capital fund ongoing planning dollars for the downtown or for the library system overall. And so again, without knowing what those plans are going to generate, it's just setting aside money because we know there's going to be a significant need there.
And I'll try to clarify it in like regular people terms for my own. I want to repeat back so I'm sure too. The capital fund is where the money is stored for capital projects. So this is reflective of the projects that have been listed and approved on our capital improvement plan and shows, once they begin to be completed, where we are. And that reserve piece is reflective of funds that have been set aside for Hillcrest Library that were set aside quite a while ago. I think that's, at one point, I think it was maybe $1.8 million, some other future needs that have been presented by police and fire, for example. And then over time, throughout the years, when we have funds, we put them into the capital fund to then be able to cover whatever else is planned for.
Thank you. One quick follow-up. So the things that are planned, like with the downtown library, are those already included in the fund, or would that be within the reserve?
So specifically with the library, that would be in the reserve. However,
Is a question, are you asking about the kind of updates that we have to do to the facility to keep it going?
oh, sorry, I retract that answer and would like to change it. The known maintenance that we have to do, which totals roughly 11.5 million since we abandoned the new downtown facility, all of that is programmed in the orange bars, not
it's
the yellow
baked in.
bar.
Got it. Thank you.
And that's also true, sorry, just to elaborate a little bit more, that's also true for other planned projects. So for example, there's funding set aside for pools for Lowell and South. Again, orange bar is not yellow bar.
And part of when he mentioned the library in the yellow bar, that is recognition that the library has just done a program related strategic plan, and they will move into a facilities plan. And so we've held some money there in reserves. And then every year, as we have a better sense of what our one-time funding looks like at the end of the year, et cetera, then we start to replenish this again. Not replenish, but we add to it. So the orange, the total amount can grow in 25, 26, 27, 28 and beyond based on what we know at the time from a kind of one-time funding perspective that the council chooses to put in there.
Madam Mayor, could I get some clarity on the 11.5 million for repairs for the downtown library? That's planned or budgeted, or what fiscal year are we anticipating those expenses?
That's in 2024, correct?
Yes,
the-
Madam Mayor, it's
The orange part.
yes, through 24, it's approximately 7.5, I believe, 7.5 or 8. It's been planned either in 24 or prior to that to deal with the deferred maintenance downtown. There's additional funding set aside. The next big amount is, I believe it's 3.7 million in fiscal 26 to kind of do some more of the larger building systems and, like kind of site work such as parking lot repairs, things like that. But the total over the total deferred maintenance that we expect to spend is $11.5 million. On major equipment, the recommended budget is $6.5 million in fiscal 2024. As was the case with the general fund, the overall capital fund down significantly from the last couple of years, but in line with historical trends. I think one of the big things last year was we had 4 fire engines and a unusually large number of police vehicles that needed to be replaced. So that drove up last year's MEQ budget. The year before that, in 22, there was 2.2 million for police technology equipment, handheld radios, in-vehicle technology equipment. So again, those years were somewhat anomalies, and now we're kind of returning to the base of $6 to $7 million of MEQ needs. On the major repairs and maintenance front, the bar chart on the left is there to demonstrate that we're continuing to invest more in major repairs and maintenance, because investing in major repairs and maintenance can avoid more costly repairs and or outright replacements down the road. So that's a good use of current funding. Specifically, the 24 proposed budget includes 3.7 million to address deferred maintenance of the downtown library, an additional 2.8 million for parks, which includes funding for a new bathroom at the Rose Skate Park. Other things like pool repairs at the natatorium, playground equipment at Hewitt Park, and roof repairs at the Morris Hills Mausoleum. Beyond parks, there's also 1.7 million program for public works, which primarily reflects maintenance needs at City Hall and City Hall West, things like HVAC systems, roof repair and replacements, things of that nature. And then there's also 145,000 for arts and history. And that's up substantially from the $90,000 in the 23 budget. But it's also reflective of $80,000 of projects that are going to be funded by CCDC. On the capital project front, as I mentioned before, it's a total recommended budget in 24 of $12.2 million. And it's really for a relatively small number of projects. As a result of the lower funding and the fewer number of projects, in 2024, we anticipate that staff will be focused on largely 3 items. And the first is working on projects that were approved in that larger budget in 2023. Obviously, those were not one-year projects, but they're going to take several years to complete, for example, the fire stations. The other major theme for 24 will be planning. As I mentioned before, there's planning dollars set aside for in the 2024 budget for future, ERP system replacement, new pathways, 4-person staffing at certain fire stations, improvements to 8th Street, police information technology systems, and library system needs. So a lot of planning money has been set aside in the 2024 budget. In addition, there's funding for recurring items like the neighborhood investment program, which is $500,000, and the percent for art, which in this budget reflects the new or proposed ordinance of 1.2% for art. So that is reflected in that $152,000. Finally, turning a little bit away from the capital fund in particular, development impact fees, as I alluded to when we were talking about the fund balance, is a primary funding source for the capital fund. And what we've done, starting with when we adopted the new impact fee plan in last year in the spring, we've done annual inflationary adjustments, which we've been doing for years. But the new thing that we started doing was tying them to this building cost index by the engineering news record. And we just felt that that was a better reflection of the actual cost that we were seeing, as well as it was recommended by our impact fee consultants, used by a lot of other governments throughout the state and Treasure Valley in particular. And as you can see here in the 2010s, the inflation was relatively constant at around 2.5%. That started to go up in 2020, and then the recommended impact fee increase for fiscal 23, which reflected the calendar year 21 increase, or inflation, was 13.1%. This year, effective October 1st, we're recommending a 9.4% increase, which reflects the inflation seen in calendar year 2022. And then the last data point on there is just in June, we're kind of back to that 10-year average that we had in the 2010s. Whether or not that's an anomaly or truly a return to normal, we'll see. One data point does not a trend make. But to talk a little bit more about that, Sean Wilson's here to kind of address some of the inflation pressures on city projects. Oh, sorry, before turning it over, are there any questions for me?
Mayor, council members, just want to talk a little bit about what we're seeing with construction escalation. And before I start, just want to apologize for the construction noise that we had earlier in the meeting. That's part of my team. So it remains a challenge against, like across all construction types. We're seeing it in a water renewal fund, seeing it at the airport, seeing it in the general fund. And it's highly variable depending on the construction type. One thing we are noticing, there's still supply chain issues, but there's not as much. So the past couple of years, we've been seeing like maybe 50-70% of the trades have been having problems, and now it's down to 10 or 20%. So it's starting to stabilize quite a bit. The other part is there's sort of this cumulative changes. So we had 2 years of very high escalation that Travis just talked about. So we're seeing some big impacts we're trying to work through. So I pulled this data from Bureau of Labor Statistics. So BLS produces producer price index for final product. And this particular one is a school. What does it cost to build a school in the US, and what did it cost, historically? And the school is very similar to some of our municipal construction, like fire stations, libraries, that sort of thing. And what they published is about a 30% compounding increase the past 2 years. So quite a significant impact that we're trying to manage. So mitigation and navigation, we're doing a lot of strategies to try to figure out how to manage how much escalation there've been. So anything that was programmed prior to 2021, we're relooking at it, updating the estimates, seeing where it's at. more due diligence. So we're engaging a lot more experts in the current projects to make sure we get really good pricing. Putting a lot more pressure on our design teams to design the budget, cut scope, do what we can, and prioritizing. So if we need to invest in certain areas and not others, that's the direction we head. So very brief, but if there's any questions on escalation.
Any questions for Sean? Sean, I had one, and I think that you're the right person to ask. So on the library, we have quite a bit of money that we're allocating toward just kind of repair upkeep on the main library. Have those all been evaluated for being like the absolute necessary things we must do to keep it operational in light of undergoing a big facilities planning process and changes that could come in out years? Can you kind of give a little bit of flavor to that?
Yeah, Mayor, Councilmember. Yes, to all of that. So just most of all the investments right now are just to keep the building running for another at least 10 years. Jessica and I worked kind of that out. So there's nothing, I guess, outside of just keeping it running for 10 years. Besides, we're also doing some remodeling and trying to maximize some public space and doing some other investments that are intertwined with that auto sorter. But the majority of the work is just keep a 80,000 square foot building moving for a while.
Madam Mayor,
Yeah.
I might just add just a tiny bit more to that, keeping it running, but also making sure that the staff is in a building that's functional for them to use. And I think that that's one of the things that I've noticed during the board meetings that I'm the liaison to, is that their staff has been operating in a building that hasn't been fully functional for several years. And there weren't a lot of investments that were put into that building because we didn't know what was going to happen with it. And so now we're getting the building not only like just the bare bones running, but also operational for the programs that staff is trying to do at the same time. And I think that that's also related to even staff retention, trying to do a job in a space that doesn't have the necessary facilities to actually do the job is difficult too. So it's kind of a double thing there that I think is really important to note.
That's a great point. Thank you. Any other questions for Sean before we move on? All right.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Sean. The last section before we move on to kind of the more procedural portions are fees and charges. So a change that's been included as part of the fiscal year 2024 budget is that we have represented all fees within the budget document, as opposed to past practice, which was just fees that are recommended to be changed. This change was basically done in the spirit of transparency to show the community, to show the elected officials, all of the various fees that are being collected. I will mention that there are some minor exceptions to that, to what is included within our budget document. Certain fees which are included in ordinance are not reflected within that fees and charges schedule. Think things like our development impact fees. There is a separate process to update those fees. It's actually a concurrent process to the budget process. But what is included in the budget document are all fees and charges that are eligible to be updated via resolution. So within that 1,530 fees that are included within the budget document, just under half of them are recommended to be increased. Just under half are recommended to be unchanged. There are 4% or 4% of the total fees are new. There are 23 fees that are recommended to be eliminated, and just a very small handful recommended to be decreased. I did mention that there are certain fees not outlined in the fee schedule, those that are updated via ordinance. The other caveat to that is there are certain fees, particularly within planning and development services, that are valuation based and displayed in separate tables. Any fees that are increasing by greater than 5% or fees that are new are subject to a public hearing. That public hearing is scheduled for July 11th. And the fees would need to be approved via a resolution. Per state code, any fees that are established by a municipality must not exceed the cost of the service being rendered. The majority of the proposed increases are to keep up with cost increases. Within the general fund, I'll mention again that scholarship funding remains in place for our parks and recreation programs associated with our youth. Certain fees are recommended to be adjusted higher than the cost of fiscal year 24 increases due to several years of them not being updated. And I'll mention that for planning and development services, changes are not recommended as part of this budget process, as funding is included. A recommendation for funding is included for fiscal year 2024 to embark on a fees and charges study, which would help set future increases or future adjustments. As we look outside of the general fund, within our water renewal fund, there is a 9.9% recommended increase for commercial versus 7.5% increase for residential payers. Within solid waste, there is a 4.9% recommended increase to cover increasing costs. Also a 4.9% recommended increase in geothermal to account for increasing costs and to allow for reinvestment in some of our aging infrastructure. Travis went through our development impact fees. A 9.4% increase is proposed, again, in a concurrent process not included within our budget document, but that 9.4% recommended to keep pace with the growth in project costs. That 9.4% increase was presented and approved by our Development Impact Fee Advisory Committee, and there would be a separate public hearing on July 11th for those increases to be approved. In terms of next steps, I think what we need for today is to advance the budget process to the next stage, which would be the July 11th public hearing. In order to do that, we'd be looking for city council approval or any amendments to what's presented as part of the fiscal year 24 budget, so we can pursue the requisite noticing.
Madam Mayor, I had a couple questions for Doug Holloway.
And we've got about, I think it's 25-ish minutes till the photo appointment, if I'm correct. And so if we'll get through as many questions we can, if there are more, we'll hold them and come back with answers too. Go ahead. That's just not for you, but just for everybody, just kind of know what I'm thinking logistics wise. Go
I
ahead.
don't think my question will be that long.
Oh my goodness, Colin. Oh,
I'm just-
excuse me,
I'm just-
council member. If that's the case, yeah, it's not that long.
That's great,
I'll be
council
like-
member too. Thank you.
I could. Doug, first of all, I just want to thank you for your promptness and your thoroughness and my repeated inquiries about what's going on at parks. And so thank you for that. But I just wanted to just get on the record and about what's exactly in this budget related to two developments in my neighborhood, Spalding Ranch and the Goddard Linear Park. What's in this budget? What expenses related to those park developments is going to occur in fiscal year 2024, and how does that fit into like the longer term goals related to those projects?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Nash, great question. So I'll address Spalding Ranch first. We have just a little under $1.7 million budgeted this year in impact fees that will go towards a couple of projects at Spalding Ranch.
And sorry, Doug, do you mean the fiscal year that is before the council? Like, so this budget or actually this year?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, for clarifying that. Actually, in fiscal year 23.
So currently,
yeah,
I
so
just asked just so that residents understand, because the timing is odd given where we're at in the calendar year.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Mayor, for clarifying that. So this fiscal year, we have just under 1.7 million. I believe it's 1.685 to be exact, remaining in that impact fee account. And the projects we are undertaking this year would be to establish the roadway through the ranch. So this is a roadway that will get us from one end of the 20-acre piece to the other end. Pretty important piece. Also completing the irrigation system throughout the entire ranch. So both of those projects are pretty important for us to get our crops in the ground, which we are anticipating that happening in fiscal year 2024. So next summer, we're hoping to be working with our stakeholders to actually have various crops in the ground at that location. So irrigation and roadway is very important. We're also hopeful to create in our master plan, we have a gravel pathway that also follows the road and also a concrete sidewalk that goes from the existing house out to the property. So our hope is in that 1.685, we'll have enough funding there to get all of that done. Fingers crossed. Of course, we just heard from Sean Wilson about escalating costs. It has not got out to bid yet. We anticipate that occurring in early July. Once we get those bids in for those pieces of that project, if there's anything left over, we want to apply that and look at how we could raise some additional funding to also do the restroom at that location as well. But we need to get the roadway in and the irrigation system completed so that we can move forward with our goal of getting plants in the ground next year. As far as Goddard is concerned, we just received the last of our technical review from ACHD. And again, this is fiscal year 2023. We're proposing to fund that linear park, which is located on Goddard Street across from Capitol High School, by using open space and clean water levy funding. And that bid, hopefully for the Goddard linear park, will go out again, pretty similar to the time frame with Spalding Ranch sometime early July. And then we're hopeful to go to the Open Space and Clean Water Committee in early August to ask for funding to go ahead and complete that project as well. So we believe we'll be breaking ground on that park sometime this fall and should be completed sometime by next spring. So both those projects are on track in 23. And we're hopeful, again, back to Spalding Ranch, that we're seeing crops popping up out there next fiscal year.
Thank you, Doug. Appreciate it.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Eric, this is probably not for you, Doug, unless anyone has any more questions for Doug.
Awesome.
I think you're off the hook.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Eric, I just had one question. So on our budget motion sheet here, we have finance administration, a request, I think, for 2.45 FTEs. And then in the budget book, I'm looking at page 61. I see changes of 0.45. And I'm just trying to make sure that that team is getting the additional staffing that they need. And my concerns in the question the reason why I'm asking this is I'm thinking a lot about our modern zoning code. I'm thinking a lot about code compliance and code enforcement, and wanting to make sure that that team has got the staff that they need to be able to address any sort of issues that might grow with the new zoning code. So one, I guess the first question is am I looking at the wrong page here? Am I reading this a little bit wrong? And the second question really being, have there been any conversations about potentially a need for more, staffing with the zoning code?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton, thank you for the question. In regards to the 2.45 that you're seeing within the motions, that's representative of two separate investments. So the 0.45 investment that you saw on page 61, as well as on page 63, an additional two FTE associated with our parking program. As it relates to staffing for the zoning code, there is 2 FTE within our planning and development services department that are included to be funded in fiscal year 2024. Anticipate a interim budget change to advance those positions into fiscal year 2023 at July 18th upon final approval of that zoning code.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, I guess maybe just one thing I would flag for council is that might be an area that we look at and examine. I don't know if there's going to be a need for more staffing there, or even to be examining the bandwidth, as the new zoning code goes in place. Will there be a need for more code compliance, code enforcement related issues? And Yeah, so maybe that's just teeing up a future conversation. Thanks, Eric.
Madam Mayor, this might be an Eric and or Doug question. As part of the motion sheet, it talks about the new city facility at Warm Springs. We got a donation and it looks like we're also taking some of the capital fund. Can you walk us through the cost of that project? How much it is donation, how much is city? And then was this on the planning prospectus and the donation helped make it sooner? Walk us through the timeline on that.
Absolutely. I'll give it a shot, and Doug, if I miss anything, please come up and correct me. So the planned cost for that investment is $9.6 million. It has been long desired to be a project to be addressed. There are numerous deferred maintenance issues associated with that facility. Absent the construction of this new facility, there would need to be significant investments to continue services at Warm Springs. That $9.6 million investment for Warm Springs is supported via a few different approaches. First and foremost is the donation, very generous donation from a private resident. Secondly, a $2 million contribution from our golf reserve. So at the end of every year, there is an accounting done to look at net revenues versus net expenses or at the golf courses, and anything in terms of direct expenses, anything above and beyond our expenses that is collected is deposited within that golf reserve. So that's $2 million. The remaining $4.1 million is effectively a loan from the capital fund, which will be recouped over a 10-year period from increased revenues generated at the facility.
Thanks.
Doug's giving me a head nod. Okay. Thanks.
Anything further?
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
could we just have, I'd like to better understand the library's strategic planning around facilities. I know that may have some budget implications, but I'd like to better understand that. So if there's someone here that could present on that.
Sure, Jessica, why don't you provide just a quick update on the planning for the strategic planning and then kind of timing around that, what you'll be looking at.
Madam Mayor, thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Nash, for the opportunity to speak. As was referenced by some of my colleagues, we have just completed, and actually since I spoke with you in May, in our June board meeting, the Library Board of Trustees approved our new strategic plan with a couple modifications that we're making, but this will set the programmatic direction for the programs and services that we provide as part of the fiscal year 24 budget. We are requesting funding to do a full facilities plan. We made a deliberate choice to start with the programs and services, and then after understanding what the community wants our impact to be, then to do the next work to look at, okay, what are the facilities that we need across the system? What are the staff competencies that we need? So they'll also be looking at what's a modern staffing model for our library. So that is work that we're really excited about kicking off. But we definitely needed that piece from the community about what they want to see us, the role they want us to play in education, the role they want us to play in community support, where they want us to lead in terms of lifelong education, but also then where they want us to support economic development, some of the services that we're starting to provide, and then how to be more efficient. So what was interesting to me is that when we specifically went to the community to talk about services, how much feedback we heard was also wanting to really have a robust discussion about facilities and the blend between what do we want to have in our buildings, what do we want to have outside of our buildings, what do we want to have technology-wise. So I think we're in a really good spot to start that work as soon as the fiscal year kicks in.
Do you have any idea when we could expect a report on those findings?
Councilmember Nash, no, right now we have just started the early planning on that. And so we're, that would be lockstep with support from Public Works. And we'll have to really think about the right scope. And we could get back to you with what that would look like and involvement from the community as well.
Yeah, I want to just pick up and emphasize that community involvement piece. So in the budget is the request for funds that would allow the library to begin the strategic planning, kind of facilities planning process. And once they're at that point, the public should expect, as we expect, a robust community engagement part of that. And so as I would imagine that as the library works to determine who will partner with them to take a look at this, given what we learned in the programmatic planning document that the library has now, then the next steps would be to come back to council with more information on what the process looks like, what the community engagement looks like, who will be helping guide this and guide us through the strategic planning process to end up with that report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I want to reiterate that point because I do think my takeaway from the strategic planning process was how much community engagement we got. We were actually, we were coming out of COVID. We weren't sure how much the community would have attention and focus on libraries. We were, quite frankly, just so thrilled to be overwhelmed with community support and engagement. We had done some open-ended surveys and got just so much more data than we had expected. It was so rich, it actually took us longer to go through. And one of the things in particular that the Library Board of Trustees had really robust discussions at our board meetings about making sure that we were really looking across the system and seeing, okay, where's the community telling us we want to go? And the board is really excited about this process of, because board members came with me to engage with the community. They're excited about coming back to engage on the facility planning because we really want to have that dialogue with the community. And our takeaway is we need to build a plan that really takes into account how long that process can take in order to really be useful and authentic and get us to something where the whole community feels they've been able to have input. Thank you.
All right. I just want to, just before we wrap up, are you doing motions next? Okay. I am going to ask some staff to stand and be recognized so that we can thank everybody properly. First, of course, I want to thank I'm not going to ask our directors to stand. We're looking right at you because you're in the front rows. Appreciate everything that you do day in, day out, of course, to help us run the city and provide service and meet our goals and mission and vision, but also the lead up to this and all the planning and thoughts that went into creating a budget that reflects our values and the importance of service to Boiseans. Christine Miller, who in our office works directly with the departments through this. Of course, Eric, who we see often. And then the finance team in the back. I'm going to call some names and actually ask you to stand because we don't see all of you all that often. And then if I miss some of you, I'm going to say sorry and then ask you to stand too. But of course, Travis Black presented. Sean did as well. Justin Erickson. Thank you, Justin. Jesse Stevenson. Kira Nielsen. Lisa Owens. There you are. I didn't see you back there, Lisa. Mike Chirac. And then the rest of you that are here that have provided help and support through this as well in the budget finance team. Thank you so very much. Really appreciate it. That I'll turn it over to you.
Right, Madam Mayor, thank you for those comments. I just want to echo that I'm so thankful that we have so many talented, engaged, dedicated people at the city who love numbers, because I can't imagine doing that work day in and day out. And I'm so thankful that you all love doing that work day in and day out so that we can have a budget. We can shepherd our taxpayer dollars intelligently and carefully into the programs that are important for our residents. So thank you. And with that, Madam Mayor, I move to refer the following items for consideration at the public hearing set for July 11th, 2023. Proposed FY 2024 authorized staffing level changes by fund. General Fund, 26.7 FTE. Airport Fund, 12.0 FTE. Water Renewal Fund, 14 FTE. Risk Management Fund, 0.75 FTE. And Workers' Comp Fund, 0.25 FTE.
Second.
Am I going through all of them?
That's what. I can't believe I don't remember how we typically do it. But we have a motion and a second. Can we do them all at once, or do we do all the numbers like A, B, C, all of them, or in one motion or separate motions? Okay, great. Thanks for the reminder. So we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Clerk, will you call the roll?
Nash,
Yes.
Willetts,
Yes.
Whittings,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Haney Keith.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Madam Mayor, I move to refer the following items for consideration at the public hearing set for July 11th, 2023. Recommendation to implement the proposed user fee increases of 5% or less, and to submit the proposed user fees greater than 5% and newly proposed user fees.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion? Clerk?
Nash,
Yes.
Willetts,
Yes.
Whittings,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Haney Keith.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
I move to refer the following items for consideration at the public hearing set for July 11th, 2023. Funding allocations for the FY 2024 contingency accounts, operating contingency, city council strategic planning contingency, revenue neutral contingency, and property tax contingency.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion? Clerk?
Nash,
Yes.
Willetts.
Yes.
Whittings,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Haney Keith.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
I move to refer the following items for consideration at the public hearing set for July 11th, 2023. FY 2024 major equipment, major repair and maintenance, capital recommendations, and percent for art as presented, including the use of the operating contingency for the operating impact of capital projects, if applicable and necessary, for major equipment, major repair and maintenance, capital, arts and history, fire, human resources, information technology, library, Office of Community Engagement, Parks and Recreation, Planning and Development Services, Police and Public Works, Housing, Projects and Special Activities, the Airport Fund, Solid Waste Fund, Water Renewal Fund. That was the last fund.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion?
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
if I could just comment on the housing special projects and special activities.
Sure.
Having worked at the state level on the emergency rental assistance program, we were always looking for opportunities to, how do we deal with these one-time monies and these one-time programs, and how can we make sure that they have a lasting impact? And I just think this is a spectacular way to use these one-time monies to have a lasting impact on housing affordability. And I just want to commend the mayor and staff for making this a priority in the budget. And I think this is a wonderful use for these one-time funds. So thank you.
Thank you. Anything further? Clerk?
Nash,
Yes.
Willetts,
Yes.
Whittings,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Haney Keith.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Madam Mayor, I move to refer all other budgeted amounts as presented for consideration at the public hearing set for July 11th, 2023.
Second.
Discussion?
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I said July 11th, 2023 a lot of times. I would invite all members of the community who care about the budget and care about the priorities that we present in this budget to come or join us via Zoom for that public hearing and share your thoughts and hopes for our city. We do have opportunities to make small adjustments to this budget as it goes through the hearing or the reading process, as well as through interim budget changes after it's approved. So I do invite everyone to come share your priorities with us. It really, truly does make a difference.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
since this is the last kind of motion, last time for discussion, just a couple comments. One, thank you to the staff. This is the thinnest book for a budget I think we've gotten since I've been on here. And it's very, very readable. So it's really good for the public to be able to have something and for us as council members to be able to have something that's easy to digest. This was probably more appropriate for the very first motion, but I'm always excited to see us invest in additional staffing and staffing needs for the city. I say this every single year, but people are programs. This is how we get the job done. And we can't get the job done and we can't keep people around at the city unless we actually have the capacity to do the work that puts in front of us. And I think that our city and our leadership does a really, really good job at actually being pretty conservative when it comes to, or being really diligent when we look at each one of those employees, that we truly need them to make sure that we can continue the services that we have in the community. And then the last part there, there's also some investments and some raises for staff, both in merit and in base, as well as some additional benefits for staff as well. And many of those were actually identified by our HR team, reaching out to our staff to see what it was that they're looking for, bringing some of those things, I think, up to some best in class standards. And again, the more that we can keep staff around and the more that we can recruit, top level staff, to the organization, the better we're going to be at every single thing that we do. So I'm always excited to see that in the budget and excited to see that again this year. And Madam Mayor, to your office, thank you again for investing in the staff.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
I'll echo what Councilmember Halliburton said about investing in staffing, and just want to point out that about half of our budget, our general fund budget, goes to public safety. And we, through a hard negotiated contract process done by many people here in this room in a very transparent way that really took council priorities into account throughout that, worked very hard to get us new public safety contracts. So I just want to commend staff in the room and also the unions for engaging on that because it is such a huge part of our budget. It's a huge investment in our community. And the additional investments that we're able to make in our police and fire staff, I think, are well earned and well used. And I think that's all I've got. Thank you.
Anything further? All righty, clerk.
Nash,
Yes.
Willetts.
Yes.
Whittings,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
Haney Keith,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
Well, thank you all once more very much. We are going to recess until noon for at which point we'll have our regularly scheduled noon meeting. Thanks, everybody.